These are 10 things I love about my brand new 2022 GR86. The first thing being the exterior styling. So compared to the first gen, now I've owned a 2013 Scion FRS for 9 years. I still own it. I will be getting rid of it soon because this car is replacing it. But compared to that car, this one is way more grown up. It is way more aesthetically balanced, and it's kind of funny to me how a lot of people, when the car first came out, didn't like the looks, especially the rear. They said, oh, the first gen is so much better. But if there's one thing I've learned from my time as a resident plastic surgeon, is that there is a science to beauty. Aesthetics isn't just subjective. And when you look at the proportions, the styling of this car, it is an objectively good looking car. The second thing that is a very stark contrast from the first generation is just the interior fit and finish, the quality. This feels so much more modern, so much more grown up and mature than that first generation. And when it comes to being a daily driver, that makes this car just such a better fit. Because the first generation, it was pretty raw, it was pretty loud, it was pretty harsh. And the NVH in this is vastly improved. It feels like a totally different era of car almost. The way that the steering wheel feels, it's so soft and feels so much more refined than that first generation, having a bigger water bottle holder. Just the fit and finish of everything. There's fewer rattles here. I guess time will tell because I'm only at 800 miles. But that first generation was a rattle trap. You could really feel like all the time and money in that car, all the development went towards the chassis, the driving engagement, the driver enjoyment, and they cut costs and they skimped when it came to things like the interior, and it really showed. But in this car, I don't feel like that at all. I feel like it is a well-balanced car, and I don't feel like the interior quality is lacking or that they had to cut costs here. Next up is the new turn signal stock. Now, a lot of people give this thing a lot of hate, and I don't know what they're on. This thing feels great to me. It's when I want to do a lane change, it's great that I can just do a light tap here and then boom. 3 blinks, lane change. My old one didn't have that, and despite what people are saying that, oh, it's so hard to use and it's confusing, I have literally not once ever misused this. It always does what I want it to do. It's very intuitive, it's very easy to use. Next is the transmission. So the way that the gear selector feels is just, each shift is more discreet. You feel more confident in the engagement that you are in the right gear. Going across gears, if you're going, let's say, from 4th to 5th, 2nd to 3rd, or vice versa, that is much easier to do. In the first generation car, even after driving it for 9 years, sometimes at the racetrack, I would occasionally get a misshift because it just wasn't always as reliable and easy to use. Whereas this one, no misshifts yet, again, only 800 miles, but it feels so much more intuitive and confidence inspiring. Even when you're entering a gear, it's a little bit notchier, a little bit more, there's less vagueness, and that first transmission was actually very good, but this has now further evolved it and improved it. Is it an S2000 shifter? No, it's not that good, but it is a step in that right direction compared to the first generation. And I've also noticed that when I'm shifting between gears, the clutch is also far more forgiving. So in the first generation, if you aren't perfect with your shifts, it'll let you know. You'll have a little bit of jerkiness to the car, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? That is just a little bit more raw, engaging driver feel. Whereas this one is much more polished and forgiving. It's not like an economy car or a luxury car, but if I don't nail the shift perfectly, it's still totally fine. It is far more forgiving of my occasional imperfect shifts. Next up is the road noise and the sound system. So, okay, hear me out. A lot of people are saying, what? The sound system sucks. Here's the thing. The road noise in this car is vastly reduced compared to the first generation. When I'm driving on the highway and you look at the SPL meter on my Apple Watch, it is usually around 6 to 8 decibels quieter in the car at highway speeds, around 70 or 80 miles an hour. That is a huge difference. That is massive. When I would take my first generation car on road trips, driving from Las Vegas to San Francisco or to San Diego or LA or whatever, I would get headaches, literally, from the road noise being so high. So much so that I would wear AirPods and listen to my music and podcasts that way to avoid that issue. Whereas with this car, it's not really an issue. Now, okay, the sound system isn't good, especially on this base trim. I'm losing the 2 speakers that the premium trim gets. But it doesn't really matter because this is still a sports car. It is still louder on a highway compared to a SUV, compared to a luxury car, compared to just any regular economy commuter. And as a result, you're not going to hear all the details of the music unless you're parked stationary. And when you're driving, it's just too loud. You'll have to really crank it up. I don't care to do that. I'm not trying to blow out my eardrums. At home, I have my nice sound system, my nice, external DAC and amp and all these headphones and whatever. I'm not a full audiophile, but I'm into that stuff enough to be a little bit dangerous. And this is totally adequate, especially with the reduced road noise. I'm no longer getting headaches. I can listen to my podcast or my music without feeling like it's totally miserable. And in the first generation, it was oftentimes pretty harsh, but this has improved upon that. Again, much more refined, much more friendly as a daily driver. Next up is the softer suspension, which is in stark contrast to that first generation. Now, I will say that I have a 2013 Scion FRS, which is known for having the harshest of suspensions. They actually changed it over the years, even within that first generation. So the suspension here is much softer, and yet I haven't pushed it as much. I've gotten it a little bit squirrely a few times, but again, braking period. And you still have amazing handling dynamics. I need to explore this a little bit further to say whether it understeers more compared to the first generation, because the understeer on the first generation was pretty bad until it gave way to oversteer. Both very easy cars to control, but they seem to have improved the ride quality and comfort of the car without sacrificing that engaging driving dynamic that you expect and you really want from a sports car. Next up is the digital gauge. Now, I prefer analog gauges, as many of us do, but when you go to track mode and it changes to this is fucking beautiful. This is fantastic. When you are at the racetrack, you want to have your gear that you're in right up top. You want to have a more zoomed in perspective of those higher RPMs where you are mostly staying in when you're at the racetrack. And this is just phenomenal. This is the one thing that has sold me on preferring a digital gauge in this car. Just because of this, when I take it to the track, it will be extremely useful. Or even if I'm doing some aggressive canyon carving. Now, the next point, which I believe deserves a separate point in and of itself, is having that oil temperature gauge. The first generation did not have that. These cars are known to run too hot on the track, as most cars do, unless you add an aftermarket oil cooler. Now, I did that in my first generation. I never actually got the gauge installed because I knew I was getting this one. And having this just from OEM right there, boom, on your digital gauge, it is so practical. It is so useful, especially when you're pushing the car. So you can keep your engine at a safer temperature, or your oil temps at a safer temperature, and your engine is going to be happier, it's going to be more reliable, and you're going to reduce the risk of having some of the notorious Subaru issues. We don't need to go into the whole RTV situation. That's not really due to oil temperature. That's a whole other story. But even in the first generation car, you would spin a rod from your oil thinning out at too high of temps. So very nice to have an OEM built-in oil temperature gauge. Number 9 is these modern car amenities. Oh my goodness. So here's the thing. That first generation was pretty Spartan. And now I got climate control. I got the interior fit and finish is so nice. I got CarPlay. It's actually wireless Apple CarPlay because I have this little dongle. Now, I had to buy the wireless dongle plus a 90-degree USB-C adapter, and doing so has allowed me to tuck this in so that it's hidden and doesn't, really eat up any of the room for my other things here. And I've linked to that wireless CarPlay dongle plus the 90-degree adapter in the description. But having this larger touchscreen, finally getting a backup camera because my first generation did not have one. I mean, those are nice touches, man. I appreciate it. I have keyless entry and ignition, which is kind of a mixed bag. I kind of liked having a place to put my keys because now if I keep them in my pocket, it's sometimes uncomfortable, so I keep it in the center console, but the console is kind of packed. It's a lot smaller than the first generation. But overall, even the AC in this second generation is way better, and I need that here in Vegas, especially during the summer when it's like 110 outside, and I'm in my first gen. I always park my car indoors, but I crank the AC to max, and I'm still getting hot in the car. In this newer generation, no issues. And the final thing is the price. Now, I paid $28,000 for this. It was MSRP, no markup, and the only option I got were these all-weather mats. And part of the reason I got the base trim versus the premium, the main reason is because I was getting impatient. I really wanted a GR86. I had waited since end of November. When I was calling dealerships, they thought GT86. I said, no, GR86. They said, what is that? And so it had been over 7 months that I was waiting. I said, whatever, let me just get the base trim. It's in the color I want. And ultimately, I'll be tracking it anyway. So now that I've been driving this car, I'm like, well, it's actually kind of fine as a daily. It's pretty comfortable, so I don't even know when I'm gonna strip it out and make it that track day toy versus having it do dual duty for the interim. Because I'm actually pretty happy with how this car drives just day to day. The comfort, the fit and finish, the refinement, and it's of course very engaging to drive. So in this day and age, the fact that we have a car like this that is so affordable, that is, I mean, $28,000, this is a bargain. This is a steal. I am blown. I would have paid $35,000 for this car. This is a fantastic vehicle. I'm really impressed by it. And it's not perfect. I'll talk about the things I don't like in that future video. But thanks for watching, my friends. Much love, and I'll see you guys in that next one.